It was a cloudy and gloomy day when Omar ventured to the cemetery, facing an experience he had avoided his entire life. The time had come to honor the memory of his older brother, who had died when he was still a child. Even though his parents shared stories and memories about him, Omar had never had the courage to accompany them. However, he had already turned 18, and he felt that it was time to join the family tradition and face the place that had scared him so much. The cemetery stretched before him like a labyrinth of marble and stone. Large statues of angels stood in melancholy positions, and crosses, some modest and others ornate, marked the final rest of lives that had come to an end. Despite his decision, Omar couldn't help but feel chills as he walked along the paths lined with tombstones and funerary monuments. His parents and other relatives who were used to that place moved forward easily, but he was left behind while observing the surroundings. He saw the inscriptions on the tombstones, some barely legible due to the passage of time, and others meticulously maintained, honoring those who had passed away. The air was filled with a strange mixture of fragrances: damp earth, withered flowers, and a touch of humidity that seemed to permeate the entire place. He hurried to join his family, his heart pounding in his chest. They had arrived at their older brother's grave, a site marked by sadness and loss. His parents placed fresh flowers as they shared stories and fond memories. As he looked at the tombstone, Omar felt a lump in his throat. He had heard a lot about his brother over the years, but had never had the chance to meet him. Part of him regretted the connection they had never had, and another part felt a strange, deep bond with someone he had only known through the stories of others. He decided to take a short walk through the cemetery, and suddenly a soft breeze rustled the leaves off the trees. The tombstones seemed to whisper secrets, and the young man felt as if an invisible presence surrounded him. As his brother's stories echoed in his mind, Omar closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine him, to feel his closeness. As he let the memories and emotions flow, an object caught his attention. Among the tombstones was a worn wooden horse. A wave of nostalgia washed over him, thinking about the toys his brother might have had in his childhood. He reached out and picked up the toy carefully. He looked around, wondering who could have left it there and why. Although he knew that his parents often brought toys to his brother's grave on his birthday, the idea that other people also left gifts for deceased loved ones touched him. There were many who sought to keep alive the memory of those who had left. Carefully, he picked it up to return it to its original place. He noted the inscriptions on the two nearby graves, both marked by the premature departure of a child. That coincidence made it difficult for him to decide which of the two the toy belonged to. Finally, leaving fate to chance, he tossed a coin and chose to leave the horse in the grave on his left. With this task apparently accomplished, he prepared to hurry and reach his family. However, before he could take a single step, he felt something catch his foot and drag him down. Omar struggled to free himself, but seemed to have become trapped in some kind of invisible vine. He leaned down, crouching to examine the situation. At that moment, a cold hand touched his right shoulder, and with a soft voice whispered in his ear, "That toy was mine." With a gasp, Omar turned toward the whisper. What his eyes caught stunned him. Before him, barely visible in the gloom of the tomb, was a translucent figure that seemed to slide under the tombstone on the right. Omar's heart was racing as he tried to understand what he was saying. Fear left him paralyzed, unable to process what he saw. The figure gradually faded, as if it had dissipated into thin air. But the sensation of his touch and the words he had heard remained in his mind. Turning his head as if returning to reality after a trance, he managed to free his foot from the invisible vine and staggered back a few steps. He wondered if it had been a figment of his imagination or if he had really seen something supernatural. Despite his skepticism, an inner voice told him there was something more there. During the visit to the cemetery, he found himself lost in thought as he looked at the tombstones and reflected on life and death. The sadness and beauty of life after death coexisted in that final resting place. Each tombstone told a story. Each inscription was a testimony of love, pain, and memory. However, the feeling of being watched didn't leave him. As he walked between the tombs, a strange oppression seemed to envelop him, as if the air itself were charged with energy. The sun hid behind the clouds, plunging the cemetery into deeper shadows. Omar continued walking, feeling the urgency to escape from that place. That encounter had left a deep mark on his head. As the days passed, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed in the cemetery. The feeling of being watched haunted him, as if he had shadows constantly attached to him. He decided to investigate more about the cemetery and the graves he had visited. He spent hours searching for records and accounts of the history of those deaths. He discovered that the 2 graves he had seen were marked by the tragic departure of 2 children under mysterious circumstances decades ago. Rumors told of unexplained misfortunes, and some claimed to have seen shadows and heard whispers in the cemetery. But most regarded these stories as simple urban legends. As he delved deeper into his research, Omar began to feel a growing fascination and fear. The cemetery, that place he had always avoided, had now become a mystery that needed to be solved. Was there something else in those tombs? One afternoon, while he was absorbed in his thoughts, he decided to return to the cemetery alone. Armed with a flashlight in case it got dark and a notebook, he ventured again among the tombstones. The sun was beginning to set, casting faint flashes of light on the shapes of the funerary monuments. Finally, he reached the tombs he had previously visited. He stopped in front of them, feeling a sense of respect and sadness. His eyes fell on the inscriptions, on the names of the children who had left too soon. Omar wondered if they might be connected in some way to the figure he had seen, if there was some message they wanted to convey from beyond. With a trembling but determined voice, he spoke out loud. "Who are you? If there is anything you want to tell me, I'm here to listen." The wind whispered through the trees as if nature itself was telling a story in response. Omar waited in silence, his heart pounding. But nothing happened, and he began to feel that his attempt had been in vain. He turned to head back home, and suddenly a stronger gust of wind sprung up around him. The diary he had brought with him shook, and its pages turned to one where he had written questions. Omar looked at it surprised, and his eyes saw the words he had written before arriving at the cemetery. "Who are you?" The coincidence left him breathless. Could it be that the souls of those children answered his questions in some way? He grabbed his pen and began to write in the diary. "I am Omar. What do you want from me?" As he wrote, a sense of presence enveloped him again. The breeze intensified, but this time it didn't feel threatening, but as if someone were trying to communicate, to share a long-kept story. Sounds began to fill the air, incomprehensible words that he couldn't understand. Omar closed his eyes, letting himself be carried away by the sensations and voices in the darkness. For a moment, everything seemed to come together in a torrent of emotions and connections, as if time itself had been distorted. Finally, the whispering stopped, and Omar found himself alone in the stillness of the night. He turned on his flashlight and looked at the notebook, where there were a series of words and phrases that he couldn't understand. However, he felt like he had unraveled a secret. He had established a connection with something beyond his understanding. Putting the notebook away carefully, the young man walked away from the graves, feeling that he had touched a hidden part of the cemetery. As he walked away, a mix of emotions enveloped him. Curiosity, fear, and a deep desire to understand more about what was happening. He continued his research, and as he delved deeper into it, he began to notice patterns and coincidences. The testimonies of different people seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle, revealing a hidden story full of secrets. Some neighbors confirmed that they felt a strange connection with the place, as if the souls of the deceased were trying to communicate with the living. Intrigued by these revelations, he decided it was time to return to the cemetery once again, at dusk. With his flashlight and a notebook, ready to face whatever he might discover. He approached the tombs, which seemed to hold secrets inside. Omar was determined to dig them up. He opened his notebook and wrote once more, "Do you want to tell me something?" The air seemed to sigh in response, and a gust of wind suddenly rose. Omar clung to his flashlight, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The shadows began to take shape around him, as if they were taking on a life of their own. Then, in the midst of the gloom, an ethereal figure slowly emerged. It was the same figure he had seen before. Their eyes met, and a strange understanding seemed to pass between them. Without saying a word, the figure began to move, as if it were leading Omar in some kind of silent dance. As they moved between the tombs, Omar began to feel a connection to the place, as if he were sharing an intimate moment with the departed souls. Finally, the figure stopped in front of a particular grave. The inscription revealed that it belonged to a boy named Mateo, who had died at a young age. Omar looked at the tomb with reverence, feeling that he had reached a crucial point in his search. There in front of him was the little wood horse that he had found on his first visit to the cemetery. The little horse with which it had all started. Maybe it didn't belong on those tombstones, and they were trying to get it to its owner. The figure seemed to look at him sadly, as if it were sharing its story through its presence. With a shaky sigh, Omar knelt by Mateo's grave and spoke out loud. "Mateo, if you're here, if you can hear me, I want you to know that you are not alone. Your story and your memory live on, and I'm here to hear you. What do you have to tell me?" The wind blew softly, as if it were transporting Omar's words between the world of the living and the dead. And then, just silence. His breath mixed with the icy air as he wrote on a piece of paper. "Who are you? Do you want to tell me something?" As he waited for a response, the atmosphere around him seemed to change. The air became thicker, and Omar began to hear a soft murmur, as if a chorus of voices were whispering in his mind. The words were barely audible at first, but little by little they became clearer. There were words of pain, sadness, and longing. He felt as if he were becoming a duct for the voices of those who had departed. Each of the voices spoke to him about his truncated life, unfulfilled dreams, and lost loves. There were stories of people who had been forgotten by time, but who still longed to be remembered. The figure that had guided him moved closer to him. Omar could feel its sadness and loneliness, a person that had been waiting for a long time to be recognized. The figure extended a hand towards the wooden horse that the young man was holding, and with a gentle gesture took the toy between its fingers. "This toy was mine." The shadows began to move, twisting and snaking in their direction. Despite his instinct to retreat, his body seemed to have lost his ability to move. The shadows closed around them, forming an inescapable prison of darkness. Then the wood horse seemed to come to life. It twisted and contorted, its dark eyes shining as if with unnatural malice, like 2 points of darkness that seemed to absorb the light. The toy floated in the air and in front of him, and Omar was forced to look at them, as if hypnotized by their terrifying presence. Then, without warning, the wooden horse hurtled towards him with shocking speed. Omar screamed, but the sound choked in his throat as the object penetrated his chest with unearthly precision. Searing pain consumed him as the toy sank into his flesh, piercing his muscles and organs and leaving a pool of blood at his feet. The moonlight seemed to darken around them, and the shadows took on a more solid form. Omar could feel the cold of death spreading from the place where the wooden horse passed through him. Every beat of his heart seemed to carry with it a pang of agony as his energy quickly faded. His vision blurred and his thoughts grew dimmer as he struggled to stay conscious. The world faded around him, and Omar felt like he was sinking into the abyss. wooden horse became a part of his pain, a twisted extension of his own torment. The cemetery became his eternal tomb, and his soul was lost in the darkness, condemned to endless suffering alongside the shadows and secrets he had unearthed. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!